Join us for a candid conversation featuring ServiceLink's Yvette Gilmore and Tony Thompson, the CEO and founder of NAMMBA, as our experts dissect home buying trends and provide actionable takeaways for those in the mortgage and housing markets. Get ready, the conversation starts now.
Okay, Tony, thanks for joining us. Every year, ServiceLink engages in a state of home buying report. This year is no different. I think that, though, some of the learnings that came out of the report are. And so the first thing I want to talk to you about is Gen Z. Gen Z is the most optimistic, ready to buy, plans to buy in 2025. How did that strike you when you saw it?
Gen Z, although I think to many that may have been a surprise, when I look at and think about this cohort of buyers, really is one around pent up demand in terms of understanding the benefits of home ownership. I think when you look at this cohort, what I've seen and what we've seen in the past is that once a particular set or a cohort or group of buyers truly begin to understand the true benefits of home ownership and also the additional variables that come with that in terms of being pluses, meaning building generational wealth, building equity, being able to also have pride in terms of saying that I own a home, then those become really significant driving factors to actually wanting to be a part of that story and not just sit on the sidelines and watch the view.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as I was thinking about it, previous generations have seen different credit crises. There's been impacts to the greater ecosystem as far as home ownership, it being fraught and being taken away and etc. This younger group doesn't have that. It has mostly been the areas of opportunity. They're coming out of college, they're forming their home units. And so from my perspective, actually, that was pretty exciting, despite some of the headwinds that even they observed as far as higher than normal in their lifestyle, in their lifespan, normal interest rates, and still the high cost of ownership. So how would you advise those or any generation or any new home buying segment on how they manage those two factors, which they both say are challenges in current environment?
Well, first is I think it's important for this cohort to recognize that where we are today in an interest rate environment is a moment in time. Also, I think if you give a little bit of a historical perspective, 10 years ago, the stock market was nowhere near where it is today. And so as we move forward and look over the next 3, 5, 10 years, I would say that the interest rate environment where we are today will become a normal expected interest rate environment, or to a certain extent, Yvette, may even become a very favorable interest rate environment, depending on the significant growth of the economy, as well as other factors as it relates to home buying. And so I think we're going through this leveling of really what normalization is, the new normal. We've heard that term a lot over the last several years, but I do think we're in a period of normalization in terms of accepting this is where the market is today and for the foreseeable future, and thus becomes the new baseline. And so if I understand that this is the new baseline, and if we can help consumers understand the benefits of getting in now at that new baseline, then over the next several years, as it rises up in terms of interest rates, in terms of equity, in terms of growth, income, they're going to look back and say, I'm glad that I made that decision to buy today, buy now.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the other learnings from the report was an opportunity to, or at least a concern around the complexity of the process. And so even getting through the process, they recognize that the level of complexity, who they talk to, who they interface with, who they get their information from, is very important, but still does not solve all of their issues. How do we advise them on getting, not just wanting to be in the game of home ownership, but actually navigating the complexities in the process?
I think as lenders need to think about how to serve and introduce and engage with this new cohort of buyers, one of the most important aspect of that engagement is going to be, and I think the most critical part, to be very honest, Yvette, is going to be around education. Over the last several years, lenders have been focused on selling,
Right.
selling rate, selling product, selling closing time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our funnel of how long it takes a buyer today who doesn't have a 3, 4, or maybe even 5% interest rate to really understand the benefits, understand the process, and most importantly, understand that there's a knowledge gap in terms of the buyer of yesterday versus the buyer of today. And so many organizations are going to have to ask themselves, how do we make sure we deliver a customer journey where there's more focus on education,
Mm-hmm.
there's more focus on building understanding, and more focus on enhancing and elevating the value and benefits of home ownership? Because for this generation, we know that they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And that survey, the survey that you did certainly points that out in some aspects that I'm sure we'll talk about here later. But
Mm-hmm.
the key to that is going to be increasing the education component, both on engagement, and then once they have engaged with that particular customer, making sure that through that journey, particularly early on, as they're going through that decision-making process and entering into that customer journey as it relates to their originations and underwriting, to truly understand what they should expect, and then most importantly, what it should be normal, because they don't know what they don't know.
Right. And I think that because you've mentioned that twice, Tony, normal. And I think in these times, and I think that also came out through the data, is explaining what normal is and what it should feel like, what it should look like, and how best to get the information. So there was, what also came out in the data is there is on one hand a real need to get information quickly on your phone to be able to self-select. But what you also brought up is the fact that you don't know what you don't know. So how do you have someone self-select the information they need when they don't know the information they need? So how would you advise lenders to get back in the game to make sure that the home buyer knows what the journey should be and what normal looks like and what questions they should be asking?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I love every year about the ServiceLink home buyer report is just really the data in terms of how deep you go into uncovering what I call some nuggets.
Right.
And one of the best nuggets that came out of this was that, to your point, Yvette, when consumers look at where and who do they go to, it was the real estate agent first.
Yes.
It was family or friends second.
Yep.
It was social and educational platforms on the internet.
Right.
And then it was the lender.
Right.
And so this tells me that lenders have not done a very good job of understanding that now more than ever, they have to pivot from that sell that we spoke about earlier.
Yes.
To the education component. And so by dripping bits and pieces of content, bits and pieces of education, because we also know that today's consumer, who are much younger, who are much more technological savvy, who are much more also educated, they want information bits. They don't want a long content that is drawn out, because that will actually not intrigue them or interest them.
Right.
And so lenders must be able to to adapt their marketing outreach where they're focused on taking content and providing it in bits and pieces of information that can be engaging, that can be entertaining.
So, Tony, I always thought that for millennials and now with Gen Z, the catalyst to get them into the home buying mindset would be family formations. They would get married and then they'd be looking for a home, have kids, settle down, etc. Surprisingly, the data in the report seems to indicate that there are actually more single people within those two cohorts that most want to buy homes. What does that data say to you?
That data, first of all, doesn't surprise me, Yvette. When, we talked about a new normal in terms of how lenders and consumers need to look at the marketplace. I also think that there's a new normal in terms of how buyers are approaching and consumers are approaching home ownership. For example, at Cultural Outreach, which is part of NAMMBA's family of companies, our marketing arm, we do a survey every year of millennials as well. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is that single females are very interested in purchasing a home, primarily because when you peel that onion back, as they say, and you look at why they're looking to purchase that home, many single females are coming out of college, not actually engaged or finding that spouse while they're in college, but thus wanting to enter into that home ownership journey. And so making that decision to move into that first home as a single borrower.
Wow.
In addition to that, I think it's also important to recognize that in today's environment and certainly from a macro perspective, marriage and that two-family income is not where it was in terms of the number or rate of individuals getting married at an early age. They're getting married later in life. And so that means that whether you're a single male or a single female, you're going to want to still inquire and desire about home ownership, thus potentially going into that first home, which I always like to remind everyone, the first home is most likely not your last home.
Right.
And so going into that first home, they will be seeing themselves in a position where they may be single. And then ultimately, once they do find that spouse or significant other, then they're moving to that next property. And I think for me, one of the gleaming and glaring insights taken away from this report is that lenders have to realize now that the commitment of home ownership is still there. The timeline is just going to be a little bit different and a little bit longer for today's cohort of buyers. And so that goes back to making sure that how do you help increase and build the top of the funnel in terms of getting more buyers into a home or in terms of doing business with those potential consumers. And one of the ways that you're going to have to do that is through the education piece, helping them to understand that even if they're single, that commitment and engagement of owning a home, that first home, which by the way, we all know the first home is not the last home, then that is an opportunity for them to start building equity, building wealth. And then obviously once they do meet that love of their life or that significant other, they will then move into and have those life-changing events. They'll move into that second, third, and fourth home as they begin to mature.
This report was exciting to me. These both the millennials and Gen Z said, listen, we'll go to auctions. We'll actually engage in an auction process to get our property. And normally, or at least in prior surveys, these were more, auction was more in the area of fix and flip. Everybody was fixer-uppers and there were all kinds of things on TV and everybody wanted to flip a home. But now you have these two generations that says, no, I'll go ahead and go to an auction for my primary residence. So what did that data tell you and what's been your experience?
Well, I think, first of all, when you look at the insights, one of the key takeaways I took from that, Yvette, was that there's an underlining message from this cohort of buyers. And that underlying message that lenders need to begin to really quickly understand is that the information age of this cohort of buyers, where they're getting information, how they're getting information, and to a certain extent, how much information they're getting is rapidly shifting, meaning they are going and turning to social channels and social platforms to really understand the plethora of opportunities when it comes to home ownership. May not understand the entire process, but that openness and availability of information has led to an increase of the awareness of the benefits of purchasing a home through an auction. And so from that standpoint, I think as lenders begin to look at how they educate their consumers, how they provide content, how they provide information, they must keep in mind that this cohort of buyers is always searching and constantly looking for additional ways that they can get a better understanding of the benefits of home ownership. And most likely, in my opinion, when they see the opportunity to purchase a home through an auction, they also see that as a easier barrier, given some of the stories that they may have heard of bidding wars, losing to multiple consumers that were paying cash or things of that nature. Whereas from an auction perspective, sometimes that first home, again, not their last home, may not be in the area that they first quite desired or imaginable, but it's also in an area that they can also see themselves starting out at from a home ownership perspective.
Yeah, I think, I think that's really interesting because they're really flexible, and so, the eagerness, the willingness, the capability, the level of flexibility, it seems as if from a lending perspective, that is the most fertile ground possible to make an impact and bring people to lenders to engage in the process, and taking advantage of all of the available assets to convey what this process should be and how it should be managed. If you had to sum it up in just a couple of sentences, what should lenders take away from everything that we've talked about today, everything that you're seeing? What should be their plan for 2025?
Pivot from selling to educating. The data, the insights, which by the way, every year, I'll say it, one of my favorite reports to look at is the ServiceLink Homebuying report. And the reason for that is the level of detail that we go into, that you guys go into, in terms of just really helping lenders understand the micro and macro shifts that are occurring. And so 2 big takeaways from me looking at this year's report is lenders must quickly pivot from selling to education. And education in terms of providing content, providing knowledge that is hassle-free, sales-free, that is positioning the consumer to truly understand the benefits of home buying. Secondly, they must recognize that journey is omni-channel, meaning multiple approaches that they have to communicate with, whether that's email, whether that is video, whether that is text, and whether that is on social platforms as well. And take that omni-channel approach, and if best as possible, take it to even a more intimate level where it's personalized, meaning we talked about single females being a very strong cohort of future buyers. How do you create a customer journey, a customer engagement strategy for single females, for females of color, for first-time home buyer, multi-family, generational buyers, understanding that how you curate that content for each one of those cohorts will allow you to go deeper, and also you engage more with that cohort as well.
Thank you. That is an excellent place for us to finish. I really appreciate you, Tony, coming and talking to us about the state of home buying. for 2025. We at ServiceLink appreciate experts like you helping us break down this data. It is rich, it is fertile ground, and it actually makes me, and I know you, look forward to the future and everything that we have to offer in this financial services industry and lenders in particular. Thank you.
Thank you.